Much to Dr. Hannah Newman for her keynote speech. We will now begin with the EU enlargement panel. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lana Pedicic. I am a research fellow at Young Security Conference. We have a very interesting panel discussion on the topic of EU enlargement, particularly Serbia's EU candidacy, in which we will aim to answer, is Serbia a friend or a foe of the European Union? The European Union's enlargement policy serves to help countries wishing to join the EU to meet membership criteria and support them in implementing economic and democratic reforms to ready them for future EU membership. An EU candidate state since 2012, Serbia has been the largest recipient of EU funds out of all prospective EU candidate states and has benefited from visa liberalization and extensive integration support. However, the EU's benevolence is not reciprocated. Serbia has been cozying up with Russia and China over the years, particularly since Russia's war in Ukraine, weaponizing migration, de-aligning from the EU's foreign and security policy, deteriorating democratically, pursuing an ideology of Greater Serbia or Srpski svet, and disseminating anti-EU and Western rhetoric. We also cannot ignore the recent extensive report published by the New York Times that ties President Aleksandar Vučić to the mafia. Our esteemed panelists come from diverse backgrounds and have a wealth of knowledge and experience in this field. We hope to shed light on Serbia's EU candidacy, lack of the EU's response, future trajectory, and possible solutions. Without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. On my right, we have Richard Kraemer, president of the US-Europe Alliance. He is also affiliated with the Foreign Policy Research Institute and the Public International Law and Policy Groups, where he advised the governments of Georgia and Montenegro. Last year, he published an extensive report on Serbia's authoritarian trajectory called Serbia on the Edge. Richard, please state your position on Serbia's current EU membership trajectory.
Well, thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank the Young Security Conference and the organizers, and Lana in particular, for inviting me here and being able to participate and speak with you all today. I'd also like to afford a caveat. Remarks that I'm going to make about Serbia are general. Like many other transitioning democracies in Europe, you have liberal democratic transatlanticists, and you have folks that think otherwise, and folks that are completely indifferent. So please bear that in mind in remarks that I make about Serbia and its people today, and particularly its government. In respect to Serbia's EU trajectory, I think it's very important to look at it through the relationships it has right now in this sort of empire strikes back, this renewed age of great power competition, and the relationship that Serbia has with Russia and China, because that has a direct impact, I believe, on its potential trajectory to actually becoming an EU member state and a genuine member of the transatlantic community. So, I mean, first, I think that I touched on what is a global context. Serbia is now sought after by two authoritarian states, one of which has the second largest economy in the world, and I believe is gaming for world dominance, and that being China. And the other is a continually irredentist and revanchist and chauvinistic Russia. What we see Serbia, of course, within the EU, or at least, rather within the European space and within the Western Balkans, it's a country that seeks to project its influences like many others, and they have their own agenda. But it recognizes that as this competition is heated up, it needs to have as many players as possible in order to leverage, what assets it has to reflect its own interests and possible integration with the transatlantic community. I think that when we look at Russia and China, however, and we talk about their sort of approach to both the Western Balkans and Serbia in particular, is that what Russia, I argue, desires is a Western Balkans that is continually destabilized, where institutional corruption is the norm, and always on the precipice of what may next be yet another conflict of ethnic dimensions. China doesn't want that. China wants something a little less. China wants to see stability in this region to the extent that it allows China to be able to invest and, most importantly, use that landmass as a route for getting its goods to wealthier marketplaces elsewhere in Europe.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Just was a little bit, so at the moment, how do you see Serbia's membership path? A little bit with Russia and China, you got into that, but we'll cover Russia and China in a bit. So next to Richard, we have Dr. Vujo Ilic, who is a research fellow at the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory at the University of Belgrade. His research interests include democracy, elections, political conflicts, and violence, focusing on Southeast Europe. Vujo, can you please state your position on Serbia's current EU membership trajectory?
Yeah, so Serbia has went through, let's say, 3 stages in the last 3 decades. It started with an authoritarian state of Slobodan Milosevic in the 1990s. That was a period of isolation. That was a period where democracy was, declining from a very low point. Elections were quite often manipulated, much more than they are now. And then came the period of 2000, where we had consolidation of democracy. We had 5 elections in those periods, and each of those elections had reshuffling or the change of government. So it was a politically very, very dynamic period. And at the same time, Serbia was reconnecting with the EU and starting its European integration. What we have now is a period of, let's say, 10 years of autocratization under the government of Serbian Progressive Party. It's a new kind of autocratization. It's what Luhrmann and Lindbergh call a part of a third wave of autocratization, an analogy to the third wave of democratization. And its feature, its gradual decline. Its feature is that the ruling party avoids any drastic moves that could provoke backlash, but at the same time, it's constantly, gradually eroding the functions of democratic institutions. So this decline has been such that at no point could we say Serbia is a democracy or isn't a democracy. Where is that point? It has been what we call in political science a hybrid regime for many years now. It means that it has features of both democracy and autocracy. You can call it many different names, whether it's competitive authoritarianism or illiberal democracy. I don't think it matters. I think it's really important to realize that there are features of both. And it does so by controlling the media, by abusing the state resources, by pressuring the voters and winning relatively free but deeply unfair elections. And that's what sets it apart from autocracies of Europe, and that's what sets it apart from consolidated democracies of Europe. And I'm going back to your question. What's different about this third stage is that Serbia has not been isolating. It has been gradually integrating into the EU during this process. And that's the puzzle we are actually trying to resolve today. I don't think it's an easy answer. I don't think we can answer it maybe, but maybe we can contribute to it.
Yes, and we will look more into the democracy of it as well. Next to me, we have Robert Kozma, a member of the Executive Council of the Green Left political movement Ne Davimo Beograd, Don't Let Belgrade Drown, Green Left Front, and member of the National Assembly of Serbia. He's also active in European Affairs Committee, Spatial Planning Committee, Committee on Labor and Social Issues. Robert, please state your position on Serbia's current EU membership.
First, sorry for putting everything in my bio. I didn't know that you're going to read it. So I didn't want to torture you in that way. Well, first of all, let me thank you for this offer to speak at this panel. Let's continue on what Vujo said. I mean, I think that in order to solve the puzzle, we should all ask a question whether do we want Serbia to be a democratic country that is a future member of the European Union. If we answer yes, then we need to learn the lessons from this process of the last 10 years during which Serbia backslided to the hybrid regime. And at the same time, it was candidate member for the European Union. So it was gradually backsliding. And currently, it's hybrid regime. As Vujo said, we don't have conditions for fair elections. We have state captured by the ruling regime where they can use all of public resources for their private aims, and they're using it for winning the elections in that way. They are controlling the media scene directly or indirectly. Just to imagine, for instance, imagine if the ruling government in Germany could control the narrative and the messages in all media with the national frequency in Germany. That's the situation in Serbia. So, but at the same time, I would like to state two things. One is to bring hope. Currently in Serbia, there are massive rallies called Serbia Against the Violence, rallies protest against the government. It's the biggest massive protest since the fall of Milosevic regime. It's more than 100,000 citizens on the streets protesting against the regime with one message that we need to change the situation in Serbia. The direct cause of these protests was ill behavior and acting of the government after 2 mass shootings that occurred in a couple of days. 2 mass shootings in which 17 people were killed, among most of them were kids and young people. The perpetrator was a 13-year-old boy, and for the second mass shooting, it was a young guy of 21 years old. But the thing is that everybody recognized that due to this type of regime, due to the control media scene, there is no responsibility of the government. Just to give an example regarding these mass shootings, Serbia has one of the restrictive laws on having arms, for citizens having arms and guns. It is very restrictive law, yet the Serbia is among the 5 countries in the world where with the illegal weapons and legal weapons among the citizens. In 5 countries of the world, estimations is that there is 2,700,000 guns among Serbian citizens. Estimation from 2018. So everybody is recognizing that the system, the regime, didn't do nothing, and it goes even further to the main principle. There is no rule of law. There is no legal state that is imposing laws. And because of that, that's the let's say, much broader cause, because of people are now protesting at the streets, wanting to change, the media landscape in Serbia, to bring back responsibility into the government, into the politics. And those things can change what the dynamics within the hybrid regime, and could contribute to have more even playing field for the political actors, so you can actually state your opinions and politically organize in order to change Serbia to become a democratic country.
Great, and we're going to actually talk more about that when it comes to the opposition. So next to Robert, we've got Mr. Thijs Reuten. Oh man, there we go. Yep. He's an MEP for the Dutch Labour Party in the Social and Democrat group. He's active in European Parliament's Foreign Affairs and Civil Liberties committees. Thijs, can you please state your position on Serbia's current EU membership trajectory?
Well, the situation is very complicated and very dangerous, I would say. And that is not only because of what's happening in Serbia, because that is ultimately also something that the Serbian people are now taking responsibility for. And that is, I think, very good that Robert underlines that there's also positive points. But it's primarily dangerous because of us, because of the deafening silence, for example, today. Because we need, at the minimum, a moral judgment, a statement. And I have that experience for months, for years now, when it comes to Serbia, but also generally to the Western Balkans. I'm looking at External Action Service account and at Borrell's account and then
Yes,
other
you're very
accounts, and I'm looking
yeah.
for a statement. Because it's simply unacceptable that well, not only the head of intelligence unit, Vulin, but also a government minister and, of course, not surprisingly, but also Mr. Dodik, are traveling to Moscow to attend a conference there. In the middle of an existential crisis that we are facing together in Europe. And that brings me to my point that goes for our policy in general, but also for the relationship with Serbia. The conflict, the war of aggression in Ukraine is showing us that we did not only not learn our lessons, we are not learning them fast enough, and we tend to forget them too easily, too quickly. Even now, you see that people do not make the connection between what we have not seen in Georgia when Russia invaded Georgia, what we did not react on, where we did not stop autocracy, where we did not stop that kind of aggression, what we did not see in Crimea, what we did not respond to then.
Right.
And we are repeating these mistakes, not learning our lessons fast enough and not remembering them. And I think that when it comes to Serbia's EU perspective, I prefer to speak about accession because it is ultimately a choice of the countries that want to join the European Union. It's not that we want to take them in.
Not to seem desperate.
Yes, that is to me also the key for a better policy, which we will come to, I think, in the discussion.
Sure.
That will be more self-confident also from the side of the EU, not to be arrogant, but to in effect help Serbia to make the right choice.
Thank you so much. We will begin by shedding light to Serbia's current state of affairs. Richard, you have published an extensive report, as I mentioned last year, on Serbia's authoritarian trajectory. You discuss, amongst many important topics, Serbia's relationship with Russia and China. Now, you did mention a little bit in your opening speech, but could you give us an overview of the depth a little bit between Russia and Serbia particularly?
Yes, thank you, Lon. I'm happy to unpack that. You know, my initial remarks trying to put Serbia's relationships contextually with Russia and China, I think represent, you know, one of the greatest challenges that it has is to joining the European Union and being a genuine member of the transatlantic community. You know, starting with Russia, you know, I think that I would describe it as a brotherly relationship. There's a degree of empathy. There are common national traits as a consequence that are shared between many of the peoples that adhere to a largely ultra-nationalist brand of thinking and worldview. You know, one, you see both societies where reactionary conservatism is sort of the flavor of the day, if not for many, many years. You see strong strains of xenophobia throughout them. You see a messianic complex that, you know, the Western civilization is on an absolute decline, and whether it's Russia or Serbia in partnership or individually have a duty and a role to actually, quote unquote, save Europe and Western civilization by extension. And, you know, these are historic relations. You know, I'm going to go back and focus on briefly just Pan-Slavism in the mid-19th century, which its first Congress was in Prague around that time, and Russia was actually excluded from it. They were seen as an empire, and, you know, with the Slavic peoples then that were coming to an awareness of national identity, were beginning to understand for their own selves what kind of trajectory they saw. They saw their countries as potentially becoming, or their peoples becoming members of nation states. Eventually, Russia was able to seize on this, and particularly in the late say the third quarter, around 1860s, 1865, there were uprisings in eastern Bosnia that many Russian elites mobilized around, and it was really kind of the outset of an engagement of material and political support that had not been manifested previously. And that continued. Now, of course, there was There was a difficult relationship between Tito and Stalin, to put it mildly, and that brought Yugoslavia out of the Russian sphere, and Serbia is part of it, for a good period of time. But then when we saw with the wars of dissolution in Yugoslavia, a space where Russian engagement, political, military, financial, began to increase, and it has reached a certain level of fruition, particularly under the current president Vučić. I don't think that we have any signs of it diminishing anytime soon. When we look at the current war in Ukraine, what we're talking about is a Serbia that allows its national airline to fly back and forth between Moscow and other destinations in Russia to Serbia. We're talking about a government in Belgrade right now that has no interest in supporting sanctions against Russia, and has stated so. It's allowed a number of Russian businesses to set up in and around Belgrade and Novi Sad and Niš and elsewhere. And then finally, although Vučić has sought to distance himself and prevent the presence of Wagner in the country of Serbia, nonetheless, it continues to recruit Serbians to go fight against freedom-loving Ukrainians. So that's sort of where we are with Serbia and Russia historically and now. The relationship with China is newer.
Yeah.
There was a strategic partnership that was initially agreed upon in 2009. It was penned in 2016. And in the years following that, we saw a massive increase in China's engagement in Serbia. Vis-a-vis trade, we're talking about most of the last decade, it hovered around $500 million of Chinese exports coming into Serbia. In more recent years, it's hovered somewhere around 2.3 billion to, by some estimates, as much as 3 billion, as compared to the 1 billion or so of exports that Serbia is sending to China. There has been, of course, a good degree of political support on both ends. Beijing is not particularly interested in talking about breakaway regions' independence, apropos Taiwan, and Serbia is not particularly interested in Kosovo not being a part of Serbia. So in global fora, they're able to support themselves in this respect. There's, of course, been a great degree of investment, not only through Belt and Road, but also in, for example, the Smerdova steel mill, and also in what's now known as Jinjin Bor copper smelter, which just came online in March of this year after being refitted and repurposed with Chinese technology and Chinese labor. By one count right now, there are as many as 20,000 Chinese citizens that are in Serbia, and they're there for the longer haul. They're not part of the usual BRI labor crew that parachutes in and then leaves when the project is done. So just briefly, I mean, what is partially happening is I see that Vučić has recognized that there are many benefits that work for him in the system of governance in Belgrade that allow for leverage and the ability to play off various interests, whether they emanate from Moscow, Washington, and Brussels as well, which is a clever thing to do. The question is whether or not it's tenable.
Right. And being Serbian inhabitants, would you agree, or do you have something else to say in contrast to Richard? Sure, Vuja, go ahead.
Start, yeah?
Yeah.
So I agree with the last statement. So
Okay.
basically, it's a strategic choice of an authoritarian leader to balance the leverage of the West. The trajectory of Central and Eastern European countries since the 90s have been to accept NATO as the provider of security and EU as a source of investments. But times have changed, not only in this part of the world, but globally. And Serbia has been, or President Vučić of Serbia has been quick to adapt to these changing circumstances and to turn towards Russia for security and to turn towards China for investments. That's been the name of the game in the last 10 years. It's one of the oldest games in town,
Of course.
to balance one side against the other. So in that sense, I see it as a temporary thing. I see it as something that can change depending on the incentives coming from the outside. My view of this is that it can be balanced by more integration of Serbia into the EU and closing ties. This is the only thing that can actually pull Serbia from Russia and China.
Absolutely.
And would you say this pull would come internally, or externally? Do you think the EU needs to put more effort, or Serbia needs to put more effort?
It takes
Probably.
both sides.
Both sides, yeah.
It takes both sides, and I guess we
Okay.
can talk more about it. It's partially a strategic thing and partially a thing of communication.
Right.
When communicating with Serbia, it needs to change. A lot of it is focused on interests, on benefits.
Okay.
What do Serbs have, from the EU?
Right.
It's largely about the money. And in the last year or two, EU has been very open with this kind of messaging. It's not about the things that we share, the values that we share. Even now, we're mostly talking about. Richard has made a couple of really good points about the historical ties between Serbia and Russia. The ties between Serbia and the European countries are much deeper and much stronger.
All right. There's another area that you cover in your report, Richard, which I think is very important for all of us to discuss, and that is the overarching ideology of Greater Serbia, or Srpski svet, which is also in congruence to Russia's world, or Ruski mir. Can you please describe what this ideology is, and where does it derive from?
Okay. Well, I'll start then with Ruski mir.
Okay.
And I won't go into the history of Ruski mir, because it extends very far back into Russian annals of history and vis-a-vis various leaders, whether they be imperial or muted as Soviet leaders, and then certainly in respect to contemporary Russian leadership. But it is an idea that promotes social cohesion amongst Russian peoples, and to a certain degree Slavic peoples, depending with whom you speak, but that there is a singularity, that there is a uniqueness to Russian language, Russian culture, and Russia's worldview. And that's been promulgated through various avenues over the years, but most recently in 2007, it received the sort of flagship Ruski Mir Foundation, which through various soft power vectors seeks to promote ideas that would, one, from a political perspective, put Moscow as the center of leadership. Historically, it's Moscow in part, but also there have been recent promulgations of the idea of Akrium, which is, I believe, Neolithic hill fort that is in the South Urals, that Russian archaeologists have said this is the ancestral homeland from which Slavs, and to a certain degree Aryans, come from, thereby allowing for a sort of greater connection to Europe, at least if you accept that particular argument in the Ruski Mir ideology. In addition to that, you have Russian culture houses, you have other means of soft power influence, not only amongst Russian-speaking peoples and its near abroad, but for Russian communities and others that have an affiliation, they have a Russophilia as well, farther beyond that. It looks to a spiritual leadership that comes from the Russian Orthodox Church, and the homeland of that would be Kiev. And so I wouldn't underestimate the extent to which that line of thinking was a motivating factor in the second invasion of Ukraine last year. Finally, there is a darker side where these avenues, say for example the Russia culture houses in Serbia and Montenegro, allow for places where those with more nefarious approaches to expanding Russia's influence, particularly those that may be linked to either organized crime, intelligence operations, or soccer hooligan clubs, are able to find a place to meet, convene, and basically mobilize those that want to support the expounding of Russia's worldview and Russia's political and cultural agendas in its near abroad and elsewhere in Europe.
So, Robert, how prevalent do you think the Greater Serbia ideology is in Serbian society today?
It's a complex question, and I mean, you would stop me after 5 minutes for sure, if I would start speaking.
Okay.
there are prevalence of different ideas in Serbia, as in any country. As Vujo said, and Richard, of course we have historical ties with Russia, but we also have historical ties with the Ukraine. Our language is even more closer to Ukraine language than with the Russians, and also with the Czechs and the Slovaks as well. So there are ties with all other countries. There is prevalence of Greater Serbia. There is prevalence of, feeling that Serbs are punished, while for other nations it was allowed to do certain things, etc. There is also prevalence that we are the victims, not the others, if we're gonna speak about the dissolution of Yugoslavia. But there is also willingness of the Serbian people to also be part of European Union. There is a willingness of the Serbian people that would like to establish Serbian nation as a nation of citizens, nation that will not be designed by the ethnic background, but as a nation as an equal citizen. So there are prevalence of different ideas, as well as ideas of democracy, in that way. So the question is where from those ideas are coming and who is supporting it, And then if we want to speak about the current regime, I'm going to go back to the media with the national frequencies. On most of those, media, informations when it speaks about the ruling regimes are always positive. Whatever president is doing, it's positive. Whether he is having closer ties with the China or with the Russia, it's positive. Whether he is having closer ties with the EU, it's positive. There is no dialogue in which you can, speak about geopolitical orientation of Serbia. That's the main, in that way, issue. And I really think if we want to have a Serbia as a democratic nation, as a nation in which all citizens are equal, as a nation that respects their neighbors, then we should, support Serbian path toward democracy and towards European Union. It means that the communication from the European Union to this regime should change. I mean, me as somebody who is an oppositional MPs and were very vocal against this regime for the past 10 years, we always had the notion that there is tacit support of European Union towards this regime. We have the awkwardness that Serbia backslided from democracy to the hybrid regime, and yet European Union only raised red flag previous year in 2022. The red flags were raised by independent agencies in 2014, 2015. Now, why was European Union silent in criticism towards the regime of Alexander Vučić? That's also the question.
Yeah.
And just allow me briefly 1 minute. I think that we should learn the lesson that appeasing non-democratic actor that is in power, appeasing him because we think that by appeasing his economic interests, and appeasing him to be in a power, because it was promised that the geopolitical situation in the Western Balkans would be sorted out. And I here think about the Kosovo-Serbia dispute and issue, that do not contribute towards the stability. 10 years later, we have a hybrid non-democratic regime. We still have an open dispute between Kosovo and Serbia. So basically, if we want to learn a lesson for European Union, for everybody of us, if we should raise red flags when it's needed to be raised, we should not be silent, or you have tacit support for non-democratic actions, because we think it could contribute to, for instance, sorting some of the geopolitical matters and issues, such as dispute between Kosovo and Serbia.
Okay, well, now, yes, go ahead.
I appreciate that, Robert. And but what I don't hear in your commentary on this particular subject is, I talked about Ruski Mir, Srpski Svet mirrors much of this, at least in sort of theme and approach and ideology. Just it applies to Serbia and the idea of a greater Serbia. Well, I hear a lot of the external influence that can help Serbia become a genuinely democratic state. But what I still see is anything from a 2022 Ipsos poll where 44% of Serbs that were surveyed didn't want to be in the EU. It's not like they were indifferent, they straight up didn't want to be a part of it. I can go back to the March 9 protests in 1991 where everyone was going after, the protesters were going after everyone except for Milosevic. And I would argue that that was because they still saw him as a leader that supported a nationalist sentiment, rather an ultra-nationalist sentiment amongst the peoples. And it's very hard for me to imagine how if Serbia and Serbians are unable to come to terms with, much the way Willy Brandt did in the Knifal von Warschau, where they actually say, what we did in the Yugoslav wars and that country's dissolution was brutal, it was illegal, and there were violations of human rights, and there were war crimes. And until there's a genuine sentiment and willingness among Serbian people to say, we did something bad, very bad, I don't see how it's going to have the reconciliation that's going to allow it to be a genuine democracy as part of the transatlantic community.
Could I?
Okay, just one more point, yes. You got 30 seconds.
I'm agreeing with you. I mean, in that way, the reconciliation wasn't done properly. I mean, in that way, the transitional period between 2000 and 2012 was not utilized for action that you are saying. And I'm totally agreeing with you. And just, I mean, to be honest, in Serbia, I'm very vocal, in speaking about the war atrocities that Serbian government committed during the Yugoslav wars. The thing is, if we want to speak about that, we need to have an open dialogue on the media with the national frequencies. We don't have democratic control over media. So that means whoever is in power can control narrative in media. In order to speak openly about the atrocities that Serbian government and Serbian regime committed in Bosnia, Croatia, in Kosovo, etc., we need to have an open media scene in which we can communicate. We need to have a democratic country in order to do so. So let's make a tactics where we will first fight for democracy and then, fight for the democratic change of our society and then to become the member of European Union. I'm speaking about the tactics and strategies.
Okay, thank you. So early this May, the New York Times came out with a very extensive report that tied the president, Aleksandar Vučić, to the mafia. Now, Thijs, what is your perception? Will the EU change will this article have any consequences to EU's relationship with Serbia?
Well, the honest answer is that I'm afraid not.
No, okay.
Because this was obviously a very, very interesting and well-documented article, but many of the different components were already known. They are not new. As many of the things that we have seen developing since 2010 were not new. It's going on not from yesterday or last week. This is going on for 10 years. Right. And as I said, it is a dual situation because I agree to a large extent that the real change has to come from within Serbia. We cannot force the Serbian people to love the EU and to want to be in the European Union. However, I slightly have a different view than Vujo on what the EU should do, because I think we shouldn't stop being used as a ATM for Serbia, because that's basically what the tactic is, not only of Aleksandar Vučić, but of any autocrat, also autocrats inside the European Union. They use the European Union as an ATM, but at the same time pursue their policies that are founded not on promoting some kind of values community, but simply for political survival, because that is what autocrats are doing. They want to use the system to survive politically. And if you look at it in that way, it's not strange that what you see is not well, easy for a values-based community, and we have to learn to adapt the language. I'm done, and I also am very clear always, especially when I speak with representatives of the Serbian government, for example, and say, look, I am a friend of Serbia, of the Serbian people, because they try to manipulate everything that we say, but we need to be crystal clear. Right. I mean, I find it very interesting, all the thing about the history, etc. But no one, also within the European Union, is absolutely clear to Serbia that Kosovo is an independent state and will remain an independent state, period. Oh yes, but we need to have a dialogue, etc. Right. We need to be clear about the situation. There is not going to be any kind of greater Serbia or... no, Serbia is Serbia. And they're welcome. I love them. I love the country. I love the Serbian people. But it has to be a country in the framework of a rules-based democratic order. Right. And as you heard also in my first response, my criticism is also inside-looking, inward-looking. Because if we as a European Union cannot at least promote or manage the stability on our own continent, that what kind of geopolitical union do we want to be? So it is our responsibility, together with our allies, the US and the UK, to step up on our Western Balkan policy, not to lean back. But in stepping up, you need to diversify and be clear about what is the desired outcome and also the desired behavior. And that is not something like, oh, we want you to be like that. No, it's your choice. But we think it's morally unacceptable, and I'm just referring to this week, what the Serbian government is doing with regard to Russia. But I can go on with a list of events for the past year.
So even though Serbia hasn't sanctioned Russia and it still remains quite, fond relations, especially with Volin visiting, Moscow. Why is the EU so eager to add Serbia to the European Union, especially as in last year, Ursula von der Leyen visited Alexander Vučić, and she was very hopeful that Serbia will be next in coming in, even though the EU knows of all the things that are happening. They're still giving them they're still giving the most money.
But as I said in my introduction, it's a matter of learning our lessons. It makes a huge difference if whether to speak with a country that is genuinely interested in building a relationship based on a rules-based democratic order. Then you can have a dialogue. You can still disagree, but you can have a dialogue. What we are trying, and are trying now for 10 years, and that's also a typical issue in the European Union, we come to the rescue when it's too late. That happened in North Macedonia, because then when there was a right-wing populist government in power, suddenly the EU started to help. And we tend not to help when there is a favorable pro-European, or not enough, favorable pro-European government, as we did not do before Vučić, because there have been countless opportunities to really embrace and include, in a positive sense of the word, include countries quicker and faster into our European family. But if you continue your normal dialogue as you would do it with any other democratic state, with an autocrat, you end up where we are now. That you are being played, because that is essentially what I think is the situation. We are being played, and that leads to the behavior of this week in paralyzation, not responding, not even getting to, this is not even intended in a kind of hostile way to Serbia. No, simply issuing a moral statement to the European Union. It's absolutely unacceptable that in this moment in time, on our continent, you travel to Moscow and cozy up with war criminals. It's
Right.
unacceptable. Even that seems to be too much to ask, and that is my point. But well,
Yeah, thank you. Vujo?
Maybe I
Go
would
ahead,
just like to
respond.
respond.
Yeah,
I think we need to look at what our options are. One thing that we can all agree is that EU integration process as envisioned in the 1990s and as opened 20 years ago in Thessaloniki is not working. It cannot work, not in the changed circumstances. And we haven't really thought how to transform this integration process. We have three options. We can continue as is, and it's a very slow and a process that does not help the transformation of the countries. We have two countries, candidates, that have been negotiating for years now, basically stuck. The tempo of Serbia is slower than Turkey's before it got suspended. Two countries that have just started negotiating now, and two that still hasn't, 20 years after Thessaloniki. And during that time, Croatia has been the seventh country in Thessaloniki, which has been a member state for 10 years. And we can see that the transformation process have worked in Greece, in Bulgaria, in Croatia, in Poland, and so on. So we need to think whether a different approach to EU integration can actually unstuck this process. And if I may, just a couple of thoughts about it, it needs to be, it cannot be a moving target. I think that the EU membership for the Western Balkan six needs to be approached as concerted, the six, and it needs to be a strategic decision of the EU. It's better to have these countries in the EU than not. It requires several things. It requires probably what the EU has been discussing internally for many years now, qualified majority voting, because allowing for one member state to block this process, as North Macedonia has been blocked for many, many years, is killing the perspective of EU membership. And so before we say, let's suspend this, before let's say, let's leave things as is, we need to discuss the third option, transforming the process.
Yeah, but I fully agree, and for those who have not been following me so closely, I'm a strong proponent of EU membership of all countries. I'm also a strong proponent of changing, and I said it, changing our tactics. The European Parliament has issued a report which actually gives the recommendations and suggestions to tweak the process. And the third thing, and that goes further than what was recommended last year by the European Parliament, I think we need bold, geopolitical founded decisions. But I do not think, and that is maybe where we have a different opinion, because I do not think it starts with Serbia. I think it will start with and in that respect, I am fully agree that we have put ourselves in a terrible, difficult situation with North Macedonia, because the proposal of last summer in June, I mean, I don't want to speculate, but I think that the French presidency was so happy with the proposal because it's not actually their genuine intention to get these countries as soon as possible into the Union. That is my intention, and in that respect, I think it would be the best thing to break that deal open and to make sure that at least one or two of the 6 countries, and it could be North Macedonia, it could even be Albania, make it even before the projected dates that are now on the table, as a symbol to counter also the argument of all the autocrats, including President Vučić. You see, they don't want you, because that is the argument that is hurting us dearly at the moment. So we need, I mean, there has been maybe a window a long time ago to have a broader and maybe group accession of the countries. I think that realistically that window is not there anymore, and it will not be there anytime soon. But I think the tactic should be to get 1 or 2 countries join probably as early as possible, even taking a bit of a political decision there to inspire the others and to accelerate the process. And then, of course, we need to support Serbia, but not in the way that we have been doing. I just received this week the answers to some questions I had asked Mr. Vaheli, because that is, to me, conceptually, I just don't understand that. And that is, I think, the difference between dealing with Norway and dealing with an autocratic regime as Serbia. If President Vučić lands in Belgrade and says, look, what I discussed there back in Brussels, I'm not going to sign it and I'm not bound by it, And then the next day, Mr. Vaheli arrives and gives 600 million euros. Of course I know that it's a good project. It's a fantastic project. But that is not the language you should speak with an autocrat that is clearly is clearly playing you and trying to use the EU as a safe ATM. But well, I think it's even too optimistic to say that Serbia is standing with one leg in the EU and one leg in Moscow. I think it's too optimistic at the moment. I think 1.5 or 2 legs are outside the EU. I see not a genuine will at the government. People is different, but at the government level to really solve this issue. And in that context, I don't understand that we are so stupid to go one day after the president does something like that, really wipes off, well, no, that's not to say that, but really insults, I think, Josep Borrell and Lajčák, insults them. And then the commissioner, Vaheli, goes there and gives 600 million euros. I don't understand.
I agree with you that he has been playing the EU, and he has been doing the same thing that Orban has been doing.
We have to stop it. We have to say, look, this, we know you, and I think they are seeing it, because my contacts also, they are seeing it, that we know your game, and we're not gonna play along anymore. I think that should be the attitude,
so
but
far,
in a with a positive intention.
Okay, thank you. I mean, so far the EU has been using monetary incentives, the so-called carrot and stick approach, where there's a lot of carrots and carrots, and the stick is nowhere in sight. How can the EU encourage Serbia toward more of a democratic and liberal standing without monetary incentives? What would this strategy look like? Because it's very apparent that throwing money isn't
Working.
effective. Yeah.
You asking me?
Yeah. Well.
Well, yeah, but
it would be great if we could think of a strategy.
I hinted a little bit on it in response also to Vucic, because to change the entire enlargement or accession policy, because I think we need to find inspiration outside the current relationship between the EU and Serbia. So, for example, very minor thing, but if you have a meeting in Brussels and you invite the 6 Western Balkan countries, typically they are being invited now when we talk about accession. Only that. Okay. Start, for example, with inviting North Macedonia, Montenegro and Albania, which are NATO members, and invite them at a meeting that is not about accession, but that is about security or defense. Diversifying, saying, look, if you engage, then you also be part of the discussion. Invite them for an agricultural council, but not invite the country that is clearly not respecting the rules of the game.
Yes. And you wanted to mention, Richard, on...
Well, yeah, I was encouraged that Vulo used the O word, as in Orban.
Right.
And that is a bit of an elephant in the room. We're talking a lot about process, and I do agree with you that there could be a way to reconfigure, rethink the process, but I think we also need to bear in mind, Fidesz party under Viktor Orban and Hungary in its present state is sadly indicative of the reality that if Brussels doesn't have a very clear political will to rein in authoritarian leaders and their supporters in their countries, then that is going to have consequences. And I'm fearful that that Vucic has looked at Orban's experience and he's been taking pages from the playbook. Yeah. And the extent that he's able to do that successfully, well, accepting your arguments about the control of media and media capture in Serbia, but that without something coming internally from the majority of Serbian people saying that this is not okay, this is not representative of who we are, we see a different future for ourselves and our children, there isn't going to be the real catalyst that could stand to getting beyond monetary measures to inspire Brussels to say, all right, you know what, this is an investment that we're going to generate political will to realize.
Right.
It helps if you get a commissioner that is fit for the job,
I commend your work that you've been doing. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, what would you like? Yes.
Yes, two things.
Quick comment, yes.
Quick comment. Yes, of course. Serbian citizens should fight for the change of the regime. Serbian citizens should fight for democracy. That's up to Serbia. But, however, I try to send a message that also oppositional actors in Serbia and those Serbian citizens that are pro-joining European Union often felt that there is a tacit support from the European Union for Vučić regime while we were backsliding on democracy. So we should fight for democracy, but I mean, let's change the relation between the European Union towards this regime. Because I wanted to raise the question, would everything be all right if, for instance, Serbia sanctioned Russia and join European Union and then start acting as another Orban? You know, that would also be a problem. So for me, I mean, if I may speak from the perspective of the EU, it would be that EU, and I agree with Vujo, need to decide strategically whether it wants countries of the Western Balkans in it, but also should bring back, you know, the EU negotiations to the essence, to the core, you know, to speak about the rule of law, democratic institutions, as well as media control. And of course, tactically, it should and could be connected with, you know, allowing to have the resources from instrument of pre-accession aid. You know, I'm agreeing with you on that. But what I'm not agreeing on is to stop EU integration of the Serbia, you know, or to stop the visa-free regime for Serbian citizens, because I really think that will even strongly contribute to Serbia having closer ties with Russia and with China and becoming openly autocratic, because, for instance, cancellation of a visa-free regime would hurt the most those citizens that are pro-joining EU, those citizens that are pro-democratic, etc., you know, because they are those that are utilizing visa-free regime. And we will still have non-democratic regime in power in Serbia that is controlling the media narrative, and their voters are totally controlled with the narrative, and for them, Russia would be the closest ally.
Thank you, Robert. Richard, go ahead.
Just real quick, we're not talking enough about China and China's presence in the country and what that means for Serbia's potential membership in the EU. You have Huawei now that is building out the whole 5G system. You have the Safe City, whereby they're providing over, I think there's 1,100 facial recognition surveillance cameras in and around Belgrade. You have most of Serbia's data storage, collection, and maintenance being supplied through Chinese firms. These are, I would argue, all aspects of critical infrastructure, less so the surveillance technology, but other aspects that once they're embedded in Serbia, it increases the risk that Serbia poses dealing with the Chinese for the rest of Europe, whether it be an EU member state or possibly an eventual NATO state. And unless the brakes are put on that trajectory very soon, you know, it's going to severely impact what I would think be a responsible membership, or the capability of being a responsible and secure member of the EU and NATO alliance. I don't know how quickly that's going to get rolled back, or if anyone's even talking about it, because we focus on Russia and that relationship, but the role that Beijing is playing and how that's going to impede Serbia's democratization or transition to being a consolidated democracy, and as well as transatlantic security, it's significant.
Yeah, and if I just...
Short, please. And because of that, we
About
as
China.
opposition were fighting against the proposal of the new laws on police, which would legally allow them to have installed cameras.
Now, you also mentioned visa liberalization. You think that Serbia should continue having EU visa liberalization. However, Serbia has had quite an open policy towards third countries, which it abuses visas to come to Serbia, and then people are pushed toward the European Union. And many view this as weaponizing migration to weaken internal borders. Should Serbia continue having visa liberalization when it is abusing its position as having visa liberalization in the EU?
Of course not, if it's abusing. But the
Yeah.
example was 2 years ago with the Republic of Iran, where when we canceled the visa regime for the Republic of Iran, and then we had an increase 2 or 3 years ago of Iranians coming to Serbia and then going as a migrants to the European Union. That's, I think, it was the biggest example. And I'm agreeing with you. We should, respect the regulations in order to have the visa-free regime. I'm speaking here as canceling visa-free regime as a measure in trying to fighting against the hybrid, non-democratic regime. If any country is not respecting the rules regarding, the visa-free regime, of course, then EU should act in accordance with their laws.
Okay.
But if I may go to your article that I read,
Okay.
I really think that the biggest example for that argument is the cancellation of a visa regime with Iran. After that, actually, we didn't have this type of example.
Well, you have a lot from Afghanistan. People are coming from Pakistan.
Yes, but they are coming not because of the visa-free regime. They are coming because they are migrants, traveling across the route from Pakistan and Afghanistan via, Bulgaria, via Greece, via Turkey, etc. I mean, they were present as migrants, from 2015. I mean. So the biggest, the biggest amount of migrants were coming from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and now from Afghanistan and Pakistan. But that
And there's also regions of the Sahel which Serbia doesn't have visas for, so they're flying in, and then they're using Serbia as a transit country to enter the European Union, and that could be viewed.
yes,
As
absolutely,
enabling, really.
But
yes.
when we speak about the migrants from Pakistan and from Afghanistan, they are not coming to Serbia by flying. They are coming as migrants, crossing the Western Balkan route and crossing from Turkey to Bulgaria, etc., changing those routes. I mean, we could discuss even later.
Okay. Yes.
Because from 2010 until I went into politics, I worked in supporting migrants and asylum seekers in centers for migrants in Serbia, and we can talk a lot about it.
Sure. Would you like to,
Well, it's also maybe a
Thijs?
bit, now that he is the only political representative here on the panel,
Yes.
maybe a bit too much. We should ask these questions also to the responsible ministers, I think, because I think that we have to command also the role of people like Robert, but also other opposition parties. So my question also to you, and maybe also to you, would be, what would then be a good incentive, not financially, because I was clear about that, but what would be a good remaining carrot, because I agree with Lana that after all the carrots, and I said it also on Twitter, and then I got all kind of people saying, oh, what do you want to do? Yeah, clearly the carrots are not working. So what would be a good incentive or inspiration, provided that we can also reach the people through the media, because that is a big problem, but what could be a good incentive from the European Union side to say, look, we are serious about this. We are serious about wanting Serbia into the European Union, but not in the conditions that have been created over a decade, and that have to be changed from the inside, like Richard said. So what could be a good signal from us?
I could start, and we will probably continue. For the first thing, I think that European Union should be openly vocal about the situation in Serbia, about the acts of this regime when they are not.
We agree. Yeah, we
because
should be more clear.
Yeah, because you were mentioning Borrell, and he was not statements
at least.
Change. I think that in the next mandate. Orban's representative should not have the DG for enlargement and neighborhood, for instance. I mean, that's the second thing.
also agree.
Also, when we're speaking about the instrument for pre-accession aid, we quickly jump to canceling it. But actually, there is, stick in that. You are allowing for us to have instrument for pre-accession aid where the control of the resources and money is on Ministry of Finance of Serbia. You have the measures where you can bring it back to the Brussels, for instance, because most of the projects are also used, by the regime to show them how to the Serbian citizens how they actually take care about the Serbian people. Well, everybody of us knows that all the tender documents and all the works are committed by the companies that have close ties with the regime, for instance.
Yeah, but
those things first
the
should be
pre-accession
changed.
money, unfortunately, does not have the conditionality that we have now introduced internally in the EU. That is a big problem because the money, also with the energy package, the money is just dispersed and there's not really a check on where it's spent and how it's spent. But apologies, but what would be a inspiration to the Serbian people other than a financial incentives that we have been given over the years?
Yes,
But if I may,
go ahead, yeah.
Okay.
I'm going back to what I said, and I think we are far beyond the point that we can talk about anything else as having such an impact that the only incentive is basically credible commitment to membership status. Nothing else really works. It has to be a set date. And this membership should then be conditional and gradual. The same way that the EU has to find a way how to deal with Hungary, with the authoritarians inside their member states. They have to find a way. The EU has to find a way to deal with Orban. Once it finds a way to deal with Orban, it can accept the Western Balkan Six as member states with a gradual accession, with having,
Stage accession model which has been developed? Or,
it's not only
something
staged,
like
it's also conditional. I mean, we see that the Commission is picking up this model in the transformed negotiation methodology. So the logic is there. We all see that this is the logic, but there has to be a political decision. I mean, and once Serbian citizens realize that they will be members of the EU, that they, when we travel to the airports, we go to that side, not the EU member sides, but to the sides where the others go. The symbolic value of membership is the biggest incentive that the EU can offer, and it's not offered.
But it's not offered because, well, I guess you would also like to comment on that, because Serbia has really been, backtracking.
Sure.
And
Can I respond to this? Yes,
yeah, and the EU has done a lot of, has spent a lot of money on Serbia's integration support. However, it's really not working out, and the Serbian citizens are also not very keen.
Why do you think it's not working out? A lot of things are working
It's as of this year, it has significantly decreased, especially when it comes to European foreign and security policy. I don't think, well, I don't want to say I don't think, but having a set date would be a little bit too easy. Because, there's a set date, I'm coming in, both, it has to come internally.
It wouldn't be too easy. It wouldn't be
it has to be,
right.
yeah. And Ursula von der Leyen last year has really been, she really wanted Serbia to come in, but it's really hard when Serbia is being very uncooperative. If you would like to comment on that.
Just a short, so the backtracking is linked to the lack of credible perspective of the membership. Because what you were talking about, the influx of Chinese investments, the non-alignment with the foreign and security policy, they're all tied to the incentive of the membership. So Serbia can do, Serbian government can do basically whatever they want, because they know that this kind of behavior cannot be punished in this sense. Serbia should align with with the foreign policy, for instance, with the visa regime, once it becomes close to the membership. But if this membership is 20 years or 30 years ahead, so they have a decade to really not align with it. This is the problem that we had in the last 20 years. It's a moving target. As a moving target, it cannot have a transformative effect.
Go ahead.
There are also many aspects, like the backsliding in the rule of law, in democracy, simply being a constructive and trusted partner in the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue that are not linked to that. I agree that shifting the attention to Russia and China might be the plan B when this membership is not coming, if you look at it like that. I still think there are a lot of arguments not to do that, but that's another debate. But all these other things that I mentioned, they have nothing to do with the the membership that is not has a set date, because investing in the rule of law, investing in your democracy, investing in your good neighborly relations in view of the regional integration are all things that would be in the interest of the Serbian people, regardless the membership. So I think that we have a little bit more serious problem, because if it was only that, if it was only and even there I tend to think differently, because if you look at the numbers, I don't have them precisely present now, but it's all fine to discuss about having some the relationship with Russia and China. But still, if you compare the amounts involved, still the EU is by far not only as EU, but also the private investment. I think some of our EU member states are
especially
among
Germany,
top 5.
Can I just mention one incentive that hasn't been, one stick?
Because that was my question. My question was, what can we do then?
I talked about the incentive. I really think membership is the main incentive.
Yeah, but
the sticks that we haven't used is that the Western companies that are investing in Serbia are subsidizing the media that are heavily pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian. And we're not talking about this. It's been going on for a year. We have these articles in German newspapers, now in Austrian newspapers, that are opening up this topic. But the EU governments, member state governments, have not done enough to really sanction the bad doers. And we're talking about sanctioning the good doers or the neutral ones, as I would say Serbian citizens are. So why don't we focus to the issues that can be changed pretty much with not much difficulty, and with targeted sanctions? I mean, the media with national frequencies could suffer a lot if actually the banks from Germany or from Austria that are heavily advertising them are really sponsoring pro-Russian narratives and anti-EU narratives. Why don't we do anything about this?
To understand it, because I might actually pick up on it, if it's a good idea. No, but you are saying that we should sanction our own banks?
Not necessarily sanction, no, but open the topic about the interconnectedness of it.
But I all very much like it, but the first question I asked, and that is really, I'm really serious about it. What can we do to break into the bubble? Because that is what needs to happen. We have to break into the bubble of the Serbian people.
Can I answer that just briefly? I know we're running
As we're near, okay. This is the last comment, and then we have to do our final.
What would be great, and I think it's not, it doesn't strike me as being particularly politically risky, that the EU needs to do a better job of communicating to the Serbian people the good that it does for Serbian people, the trade that it has with Serbia. Sure. And when I look at how both USAID and how the Chinese equivalents market themselves and brand themselves in the countries where they're active, it's abundantly apparent. And was 2020, when Serbs were polled about who provides the greatest amount of trade and aid to Serbia, 40% of Serbs said China, despite the dwarfing amount as compared to the 300 million in aid, in trade and massive amounts of aid that dwarfs China. Please be vocal about that from Brussels.
We are notoriously bad in
notoriously
that.
So as we're near the end, my last question to all of you, and you have 1 minute each, and then we will move on to the questions. Where do you see Serbia in the next few years? Will Serbia position itself further toward autocracy and perhaps pursue its nationalist ideology of Greater Serbia? Or is there hope Serbia can be steered toward Western values and the European Union? Essentially, will Serbia be a future friend or a foe of the European Union? And we can start with Thijs. Go ahead.
For sure, and changing the title of the forum
Yes,
a little bit,
yeah.
Serbian people, the Serbians, are friends, are Europeans. That's for me the fundamental motivation to keep working for this, because historically things have grown as they have grown and decisions have been made, but we are one continent. We had in mind with the European Union, with the European project, to create the biggest zone of stability, freedom and values on our continent, and that should include, goes for me without saying, the entire Western Balkan region, and also Ukraine and Moldova for that matter. So to me, the Serbian people are and will remain our friends. I think that the perspective indeed should remain a full integration, but I think for the next couple of years we will see, and that's not because that's my preferred scenario, but I think that what we will see is that we have to seek for inspiration in getting one or two countries as quickly as possible into the European Union, and hopefully that will serve as an inspiring example and as a token that it is actually possible, because on that I agree with every criticism possible on the European accession process. It's been too lengthy. The EU has not lived up to its commitments. For example, with North Macedonia, with Kosovo's visa liberalization, etc., etc. We need to keep our promises, but also be very clear and engaged when it comes to taking sides, taking a statement on things. But for me, Serbia has everything to play for, but it's at least for half of the issue in the hands of the Serbians as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Robert.
Quickly, I mean...
Friend or foe of the future? Go ahead.
Absolutely friend. Serbian citizens and Serbia is friend, and I see it in a close future as a democratic regime that is part of European Union. In order to do so, we need to change the regime in Serbia. Vučić regime, it's going to continue backsliding. They cannot, take Serbia to join European Union, because prior to that, they are conditioned to solve the crime and corruption, but they are corruptive and criminal regime. They need to establish free media, but then they will lose, we will have other narratives that citizens could hear. They need to establish conditions for fair elections, and certainly then they are losing those elections. I believe also in political organizing, and I believe that we can change this regime, although we don't have the fair elections. But I really call for actors from European Union to support the Serbian fight for democracy and to support our hopes to becoming the member of European Union.
Thank you, Robert. Richard.
Thank you. Well, look, for Serbia to become a friend, I see the following things need to happen. One, there needs to be a gradual severance from a relationship with Russia, particularly in respect to the energy sector, which just signed up for another 3-year deal of natural gas coming into Serbia, so I guess that's not going to change anytime soon. All the way to the Orthodox Church and beyond, there needs to be a distancing and there needs to be greater autonomy. In respect to China, I'm fearful, as indicated in my remarks to you, Robert, and others, that you're going to pass a Rubicon where China is going to be so embedded in your economy, your critical infrastructure, that the physical risk of Serbia being part of EU and NATO is going to preclude it from actually being a genuine member, if even an official member. And the third, as we touched on before, there needs to be a genuine reckoning, I think, amongst the Serbian peoples that, one, the irredentist ideas that surround Srpski Svet, Serbian world, are unrealistic, they're not going to happen, they're not democratic, and they're not in the Europeans' interest overall, much less the transatlantics. And that, otherwise, without coming to terms with, the atrocities in particular that were committed in the dissolution of Yugoslavia and openly recognizing and confessing the wrongs that had been done by many Serbs, if I'm sitting in Brussels, I'm like, I have such a headache with this guy, Viktor Orban. Why do I want to have another country in there that's going to give me an equal headache?
Right. Yeah.
So in which case, Serbia's going to be a foe.
You go with the foe. All right.
Yeah.
Vuja, friend or foe?
I'm going to continue where Richard talked with Orban, just the same that I think that Hungary belongs to the EU, should stay a member state in spite of Orban. I think the same of Serbia and the Western Balkan states. I think that they should be member states of the EU and should be set on a path of setting the date for the membership. I think they are friends of Europe. And I also think that, we need to see through the game. And we talked about the game a lot. Orban has called it his peacock dance. Doing something outrageous, then stepping back, and then doing something destructive and bad. Always balancing this. We know that Vučić has been doing this with Kosovo, with Russia, with the region. We have to see the Russian world sending Vulin to Moscow as outrageous thing, as chips that he can use, and separate what the EU and the member states, their relations with Serbia, on a different track from Vučić. Vučić is not here to stay forever. He comes and goes. Serbia needs to become a member state of the EU, and we have to behave to push it in this direction.
Thank you for your point and your contribution during this debate. Now we will take questions from the audience. We'll take a couple. Please state your name and who your question is directed to. Any questions? Go ahead.
The mic is coming.
Vitus.
And there is another guy.
Huh?
There is another guy as well. There is another guy.
Oh, okay,
I
okay.
misuse my position. Vitus Stavia, head of academia of this very organization while we're all here. First of all, thank you for coming, and thank you for the panel. It's been super interesting. You've been also talking about Orban. I don't want to talk about Hungary, but I would like to talk about the financial aid and about the fact that the EU froze the COVID funds, and we see that it's actually possible to act upon a state that is not acting according to how we would like the state to stand for the liberal values that we like to have in the EU. So the question is, as EU citizens, it is a very politicized topic. We care about it a lot. It's in the newspapers, it's in the media every day, basically. So why is it that nobody really cares? I mean, apart from the obvious fact that Serbia is not part of the EU, but is it maybe that also EU citizens don't really care about Serbia becoming an EU member or not? Just like in a provocative way, because we have been talking about Serbian people being in favor of becoming an EU member or not, but what is the EU member states' people's position on that, and what can we do to maybe care about it more as EU citizens?
Thank you. We had another one, I believe. Yes. Oh, just a second. We'll give you a mic.
So my name is Daniel, and my question was more directed to the Serbian MP. I wanted to know how influential private broadcasters were in the country and what their positions in general were.
Okay, thank you. Another one? Yes, front row.
Yeah, my name is also Daniel, so 2 in a row. My question would be, before talking about actually letting in any other country, and especially Serbia, don't we need to first reform and change the European Union in order to make it possible to handle with countries that may become estranged and act with countries that we don't like to act with at the moment, like with China or Russia?
Thank you. Who are you directing this question to?
The general panel.
General, okay.
Yeah.
And do we have one more and that's it? Yes, the lady in the back, yeah.
Hello, my name is Andrea, and I was wondering whether something like a tool, a EU tool, like the cooperation and verification mechanism that was implemented in Romania and Bulgaria, as they enter the EU. Do you think that a tool like that would be possible, could actually work with Serbia? Or is it that Serbia has to develop into a full democracy before it can actually join the EU and something like a cooperation and verification mechanism would be implemented?
Thank you. I don't think we will have more time for any questions. Would you like to respond? For the first question, Vitas's question.
About the European citizens.
I think the question about the support within the European member states and also the reforms are a bit linked. To be very brief, I think at the moment Serbia is doing everything right to make my life and that of all other MEPs that want to explain the story of the region in our member states as difficult as possible. So in that respect, it's not helpful. Because what we need is actually a different approach also, especially within Serbia, to make the case also for Serbia. But you are right, there is a general skepticism. I see it, I'm coming from the Netherlands, which is not exactly the country maybe you would expect, having such a strong love for including this region into our union, but I believe in that. But it links to the question about the reforms, and I think we need also to use the current geopolitical necessity of including new countries, having accession open to new countries to the European Union, to convince also the leaders at the same time, and that's going to be awfully difficult because we are facing a double challenge. In the past, we have had a number of occasions that people said, okay, let's do first the reforms and then we will talk about accession again. Basically, geopolitically, we have no other choice than doing them both at the same time, maybe integrated and also using, and I'm including the verification mechanism in it as well, because that could be part of an approach where you try to build on models of staged accession, of partial accession. Without calling it that way, we are basically on the way of experimenting with that, because we gave, for example, Moldova, but also Ukraine, ahead of even formal membership, some kind of access to parts of the internal market. I think that could be a model to work on, and with some kind of mechanism to keep that under control could be part of it. But basically, we are facing an incredible challenge, and this will be the last seconds that I speak. So I also want to encourage all the young people here to embark on this journey, because we need to do this with the next generation, and we are doing it together. But it is our task. It's not something to be afraid of. It's not that this content, no, we have everything to play for. So I want to also encourage you to join that difficult mission together with us, and to inspire us, because I think that you might understand better, looking at the developing history today with the war of aggression, why we need to step up our game instead of leaning back on this.
Thank you. I believe a speaker.
To the question.
Yes, question toward you.
Well, let me again speaking about the media. Sorry for that. The thing is that in Serbia, all the medias with the TV stations with the national frequencies, one is public broadcasting company, and 4 others are private. But those private as well, they are also siding with the regime. So basically all the informative program and all the news that you can listen there is always pro-regime, and opposition actors are described as traitors, or defamatory language and speech is used, etc. So basically that's when it comes to the private stations with the national frequency. But there are private stations that do not have national frequency, that's cable private stations, you can watch them over the cable, that are independent news companies, and they're doing really, a proper media, but people can watch it only over cable, which means, and Thijs is very well fond of it, that there is a war between Serbian telecom, which is one of the main provider of telecommunication, and also infrastructure for internet and for cable broadcasting, where state-owned telecom do not allow to those infrastructure for those internet and TV providers that put private companies' channels of independent media in their package offer for citizens. So basically, in doing so, I mean, they are of course breaching the law, but also they are contributing to the media scene, which is not independent, which is controlled by the regime.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
2 points I just wanted to build on what Robert was saying that I think worth noting. One, in respect to telecom and broadband and cable, it's not just in Serbia, and it was last year that Serbia Telecom, I believe, sought to get into the cable market by purchasing Premier League soccer. And that would allow it to, basically, if you're in Bosnia or if you're North Macedonia and you want to watch Premier League soccer, you have to go through a Serbian channel, which then will have, of course, news and other programming that will present a Serbian worldview under the current government that is frankly not democratic. Secondly, we've talked a lot about media. I think it's important to also bear in mind that very good article in Radio Free Europe not long ago, it was earlier this year, the long article on Serbian textbooks in schools, and what some would argue as a rather gross misinterpretations of history that serve the ideological bent of Serbian world. So it's more than just what's sort of happening at this broadcast level within Serbia. It expands beyond that, and then it's also when we talk about messaging and where the government stands, it's not just media, it's actually embedded in the school system at this juncture.
Great, thank you. So as we come to an end to Serbia's EU candidacy, a friend or a foe, thank you so much for tuning in from the audience and from those at home watching online. We will have lunch right now, and then at 1:30, the German ambassador to Ukraine, Anke Feldhusen, will give a keynote speech. Thank you very much, and hopefully you'll come next. Yeah.